When we talk about power, influence, and global politics, many people think it's all about money, armies, or technology. But let me tell you, real power is not always about what is visible. It's about what happens behind the scenes, quietly, consistently, and often unnoticed. Sometimes the biggest victories are not written in headlines. They are hidden in the shifts of perception, in the cracks of narratives, and in the way the world slowly starts to see things differently. For years, we were told a story that one country in South Asia had all the influence in Washington, that its lobby was too powerful, too untouchable. Many believed Pakistan was forgotten, sidelined, or simply too small to shape the conversation. But history has its own rhythm, and truth has its own way of coming back. Today, the fall of that influence and the quiet rise of Pakistan's relevance is not just politics, it's a lesson for all of us. Because life is not about noise, it's about persistence. It's not about how others label you, but how you prove your value when the time comes. And Pakistan is proving once again that no matter how strong the other side may look, no voice can be silenced forever. So I invite you to stay with me until the end of this talk, because what I'm about to share is not only about the fall of a lobby in America. It's about hidden victories, silent transformations, and how resilience always finds a way to win. If you listen closely, you will find lessons here for nations, for businesses, and for your own life. The United States has always been a nation that shapes its foreign policy according to evolving global realities rather than emotional or historical ties. For a long time, Washington appeared to place India at the center of its South Asia strategy, particularly after the Cold War era and during the early years of the US-China competition. India was presented as the natural ally of America in the region, promoted as the counterweight to China, and supported through defense, trade, and diplomatic engagements. However, recent developments show that the US has begun to reconsider this India-centric approach and is gradually rebalancing toward a more inclusive South Asian outlook, where Pakistan once again becomes difficult to ignore. This shift is not sudden, but rather a reflection of how global power alignments are reshaping priorities. America is realizing that its interests in Asia cannot be served through India alone. The US strategy requires reliable partners who can ensure regional stability, counter-terrorism cooperation, and safe corridors for energy and trade routes. Pakistan holds a unique geographic and geopolitical position that India cannot replicate, from Afghanistan's stability to China's Belt and Road Initiative intersecting with Pakistani territory to access towards Central Asia and the Gulf. Pakistan remains an unavoidable factor in US calculations. For years, the dominance of the Indian lobby in Washington attempted to suppress this reality, painting Pakistan as a problem rather than a solution. But today, circumstances on the ground are forcing American policymakers to see beyond that narrative. Furthermore, the Ukraine war, the shifting global order, and the increasing importance of supply chain diversification are pushing Washington to broaden its regional ties. America needs to maintain influence not just in India, but across South Asia, where Pakistan has a pivotal role. Even in security concerns, Pakistan's intelligence corporation, its influence in Afghanistan, and its role in counterterrorism are areas where Washington cannot afford to look the other way. This is why the old model of over-reliance on India is now being reassessed in favor of a balanced approach. In this environment, Pakistan's position has transformed from being sidelined to being reconsidered as an essential partner. The narrative of indispensability is slowly returning, not because of loud declarations, but because of the undeniable geopolitical realities that favor Pakistan's relevance. This recalibration in U.S. foreign policy marks the beginning of a shift where India is no longer seen as the sole pivot and Pakistan is once again part of the bigger strategic equation. For many years, the Indian lobby in Washington enjoyed an exceptional level of access and influence within the American political system. It built its strength through well-funded advocacy groups, strong diaspora networks, and consistent alignment with U.S. foreign policy objectives, particularly during the years when countering China became Washington's top concern. This influence allowed India to project itself as an indispensable partner, secure defense deals, and shield itself from criticism on sensitive issues like Kashmir and minority rights. However, the tide is beginning to turn, and the once dominant Indian lobby is facing a decline in credibility and effectiveness. One of the main reasons for this decline is over-politicization. Indian lobbyists invested heavily in building a narrative that portrayed India as the only reliable democracy in the region. Yet this narrative has weakened due to growing international scrutiny of India's internal policies. Reports of democratic backsliding, suppression of dissent, and rising intolerance toward minorities have dented India's soft power appeal in Washington. Policymakers who once accepted India's claims without question are now facing counter voices from academics, think tanks, and human rights organizations that challenge the lobby's version of reality. The inability of Indian advocates to adapt to this changing environment has diminished their impact. Another factor is internal division. The Indian diaspora in the US is not as united as it once was, while some groups remain loyal to the political establishment in New Delhi. Others have grown critical of India's domestic trajectory and are openly engaging with US lawmakers to highlight concerns over human rights, press freedom, and authoritarian tendencies. These divisions reduce the overall effectiveness of the lobby, making it harder to present a unified front to American decision makers. Equally important is the mismatch between US strategic interest and the narratives pushed by the Indian lobby. Washington's concerns are increasingly global in nature. Supply chains, energy, security, counterterrorism, and managing multiple regional conflicts. The Indian lobby has continued to focus narrowly on portraying Pakistan as a threat and India as a solution. This outdated approach has failed to resonate with US policymakers who now view South Asia through a more complex lens where Pakistan's role cannot be ignored. The decline is subtle but noticeable. While the Indian lobby still has influence, it is no longer able to dictate the conversation in Washington the way it once did. Its failure to adjust to new realities, combined with growing skepticism of India's internal politics, has weakened its once dominant grip on U.S. policy circles. Pakistan's position in global affairs has always been defined by its geography and strategic relevance, but in recent years, this importance is being re-emphasized as new global realities unfold. At the intersection of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East, Pakistan occupies a geographic corridor that connects major powers, trade routes, and energy supplies. This location alone makes the country vital for any nation that seeks long-term influence in the region. The United States, despite past policy fluctuations, is once again realizing that Pakistan is not a peripheral player, but a central figure in ensuring stability and balance in Asia. One of the primary aspects of Pakistan's strategic relevance is its role in counterterrorism and regional security. For 2 decades, Pakistan has been a frontline partner in the global fight against terrorism, providing intelligence cooperation and sacrificing lives to combat extremist networks. Even when relations with Washington faced strain, American policymakers quietly acknowledged that operations in Afghanistan and broader regional security could not be managed without Pakistani input. With the Taliban back in power, Pakistan's influence in shaping the future of Afghanistan becomes even more critical to U.S. interests, making complete disengagement impossible. Another important dimension is Pakistan's role in energy and trade corridors. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, linking China with Wada port and beyond, is not just a project for Beijing. It represents a gateway to the Indian Ocean and a route that reshapes global trade flows. For the U.S., maintaining oversight and some degree of influence over such corridors requires engagement with Pakistan. Additionally, Pakistan's proximity to Central Asia and the Gulf makes it a natural hub for future energy pipelines, regional connectivity projects, and logistical routes, all of which the West cannot afford to ignore in a multipolar world. Pakistan's position also carries weight in the context of great power rivalry. While India is presented as a counterbalance to China, Pakistan holds the capacity to act as a stabilizer between competing blocs. Its long-standing ties with China, improving relations with Russia, and historical cooperation with the U.S. make it one of the few countries capable of engaging across divides. This versatility enhances its strategic value at a time when Washington seeks flexible partners who can adapt to changing realities. Thus, Pakistan's relevance today is not dependent on rhetoric, but on undeniable geopolitical truths, from regional security to energy corridors and great power competition. Pakistan remains a critical piece of the global chessboard, whose importance is being increasingly acknowledged by those who shape policy in Washington. And for years, India managed to cultivate a strong global image built around the idea of being the world's largest democracy, a rising economic power, and a nation committed to pluralism. This carefully designed perception was one of the key strengths of the Indian lobby in Washington, as it enabled policymakers to overlook uncomfortable realities. However, in recent times, this image has begun to crack under the weight of undeniable evidence concerning India's internal human rights record, from Kashmir to the treatment of minorities, and from restrictions on free speech to increasing reports of democratic backsliding. The narrative of India as a liberal democracy is being openly challenged in influential circles within the United States. Kashmir remains at the forefront of this conversation. The abrogation of Article 370 and the subsequent clampdown on freedoms in the region attracted global criticism, but more importantly, it raised questions in Washington's policymaking institutions. Lawmakers, think tanks, and human rights groups have documented curfews, communication blackouts, and the suppression of political voices. These developments directly contradict the democratic values India has long claimed to embody. And for U.S. leaders who are under pressure from advocacy groups and human rights organizations, ignoring such realities is becoming increasingly difficult. The situation of religious minorities within India further deepens this scrutiny. Rising incidents of violence against Muslims, Christians, and Dalits have been highlighted in international reports, including those by U.S. State Department affiliated bodies. Such findings provide ammunition to groups within America that question why Washington continues to embrace a country facing accusations of intolerance and systemic discrimination. These concerns are not limited to advocacy groups, but are entering mainstream policy discussions, eroding the effectiveness of the Indian lobby in controlling the narrative. Additionally, India's handling of press freedom and civil society has been exposed at global forums. Crackdowns on journalists, bans on NGOs, and restrictive laws against dissent are being cited as signs of authoritarian tendencies. For American policymakers, who often justify alliances on the grounds of shared democratic values, these revelations weaken the case for unquestioned support to India. The gradual but steady exposure of these issues has created a new environment in Washington, where India is no longer automatically viewed as the moral high ground in South Asia. Instead, the narrative is shifting towards skepticism, and the Indian lobby is finding it harder to deflect criticism. This shift directly impacts India's ability to shape U.S. policy in its favor and indirectly strengthens Pakistan's position by diminishing the one-sided narrative that once dominated Washington. Pakistan has long been portrayed in Washington through a narrow lens, shaped largely by external narratives, particularly those amplified by the Indian lobby. For years, this overshadowed Pakistan's ability to present its own perspective effectively. But in recent times, a quiet transformation has been taking place in the way Pakistan engages with U.S. policymakers, intellectual circles, and the diaspora. Instead of allowing its story to be told by others, Pakistan has started building a counter-narrative that highlights its strategic value, cultural depth, and diplomatic potential. This shift is subtle yet powerful, as it is not based on loud propaganda but on carefully placed arguments, strategic partnerships, and intellectual engagement. Think tanks and academic forums in Washington are becoming platforms where Pakistan's voice is increasingly heard. Scholars, diplomats, and experts are providing nuanced analysis that counters outdated stereotypes and presents Pakistan as a country with legitimate security concerns, economic opportunities, and a vital role in regional stability. By engaging in debates on Afghanistan, counterterrorism, and regional connectivity, Pakistan has positioned itself not as a problem, but as part of the solution. This effort to reshape perceptions through research and dialogue gives greater legitimacy to its narrative in American policy circles. The role of the diaspora is equally important in this transformation. Pakistani Americans are playing a more active role in advocacy, political participation, and policymaking discussions. By leveraging their professional networks and influence, they bring attention to issues such as Kashmir, human rights, and the importance of balanced relations in South Asia. Their growing visibility within U.S. politics is gradually balancing the dominance once enjoyed exclusively by the Indian lobby. In addition, Pakistan is focusing on strategic partnerships that highlight shared interests with the U.S., whether it is cooperation in counterterrorism, potential collaborations in renewable energy, or the promise of trade and investment opportunities. Pakistan is framing itself as a constructive partner. This approach contrasts with the older defensive tone that once defined its diplomacy, showing greater confidence and clarity in projecting national interests. This emerging counter-narrative is not about competing in propaganda, but about presenting facts, realities, and opportunities in a credible way. By grounding its arguments in geopolitical logic and moral reasoning, Pakistan is slowly creating a space for itself in Washington's conversations. It is through this careful recalibration that Pakistan's diplomatic voice is growing stronger, allowing it to influence decisions and reduce the space for one-sided narratives that previously dominated. The decline of the Indian lobby in Washington is not being openly celebrated by Pakistan, yet it represents a quiet but meaningful victory that is reshaping the balance of power in South Asia's diplomatic landscape. For decades, India successfully built an image of being the preferred partner of the United States, often at the expense of Pakistan's reputation and influence. This dominance allowed New Delhi to push its narratives while sidelining Pakistan's role in regional stability. However, as India's credibility weakens and Pakistan's relevance resurfaces, a new equilibrium is taking shape, one where both countries are viewed through a more balanced lens rather than one overshadowing the other. This hidden victory lies in subtle yet profound shifts. Washington no longer accepts Indian talking points uncritically, particularly those that paint Pakistan as solely a source of instability. Instead, Pakistan's importance in counterterrorism, its influence in Afghanistan, and its role in regional trade and energy corridors are again part of policy discussions. This re-entry into the strategic dialogue, even if understated, signifies that Pakistan's voice can no longer be excluded. The Indian lobby's decline has therefore indirectly opened space for Pakistan to reassert itself in areas where its perspective had long been suppressed. Another dimension of this quiet success is the growing recognition of India's internal challenges. As reports of democratic decline, human rights violations, and suppression of minorities gain traction in Washington, the narrative of India as the unchallenged moral authority in South Asia is eroding. This erosion naturally balances the diplomatic playing field as Pakistan is no longer judged solely against an idealized image of India. By default, this creates room for Pakistan's arguments to be taken more seriously, and this subtle shift marks an unspoken win. And what makes this victory hidden is Pakistan's restrained approach. Instead of loud declarations or aggressive campaigns, it has relied on patience, quiet diplomacy, and the gradual emergence of undeniable geopolitical truths. Pakistan is not celebrating India's missteps, but is instead positioning itself as a responsible and necessary partner. In the long run, this quiet strategy carries more weight than overt triumphalism because it builds sustainable credibility. Ultimately, the decline of the Indian lobby symbolizes more than just a loss of influence for New Delhi. It represents a rebalancing of narratives in Washington. Pakistan's hidden victory lies in regaining space, credibility, and relevance without needing to wage an open battle for recognition. It is this understated return to balance that underscores the changing dynamics of U.S.-South Asia relations. Ladies and gentlemen, as we reflect on these unfolding realities, it becomes clear that the era of one-sided dominance in Washington is drawing to a close. The fall of the Indian lobby is not just about the decline of influence. It is about the rise of balance, fairness, and recognition of the deeper truths that shape South Asia. For Pakistan, this is not a noisy triumph, but a quiet victory, a testament to resilience, patience, and the undeniable weight of geography and strategy. The world is beginning to see what has always been true. Pakistan is not on the sidelines, it is at the heart of the conversation, a partner that cannot be ignored in the great game of global politics. The future belongs to those who adapt, those who remain steady while others falter, and those who choose credibility over noise. Pakistan has shown that strength is not always measured by how loudly you speak, but by how firmly you stand. This hidden victory is a reminder that persistence pays, that truth finds its way, and that every nation has its moment to rise again when the world least expects it. To all of you listening today, carry this lesson with you. In life, in business, and in politics, your real victories may not always be celebrated in the open, but they shape the future in silence. Trust the process, remain resilient, and remember that even the quietest steps can echo the loudest in history. Good luck to you all in your journeys ahead, and thank you for giving me your time, your attention, and your open minds. It has been an honor to share these thoughts with you today.